Alright, so in this project we're going to create a verify account UI, and you might have seen this if you sign up for something or whatever and they send you a code and you have to validate that code on a website or some kind of app. And this is just the UI part. We're not adding any kind of functionality other than the UI and typing in numbers and having it hop to each input here, because these are all separate inputs. So basically when you come to the page, it's going to focus on the first one, and I can put in a number, and then it's going to bring me to the next input. I can put another number, another one, and then if I want to change a number, if I want to go back, I can hit backspace and put a different number in and continue on. If I want to change that again, I can change that and then enter, and then you would have it, validate with whatever, with your database and authentication and all that stuff. But this is just the UI, so that's what we're going to be building in this project. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's start on our HTML here, and I have my browser a little wider than usual just because of the width of the UI. So in the title, I'm just going to change that to verify account, and down here we're going to have a container, and in this container let's do an H2 and just say verify your account, and then a paragraph, and I'm going to just copy and paste that paragraph in, which basically just says, we emailed you a 6-digit code, enter the code below. And then let's do a code dash container, which is going to wrap around the code, which is going to be 6 inputs. So let's say input, and let's give this a class of code, except it's not going to be text, it's going to be a number type. And we're going to add a placeholder of 0. And then let's set a minimum and a max. So on a number input, we can set a minimum, which is going to be 0, and max, let's set that to 9, and let's make this required. Okay, and then I'm going to copy this down. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we want 6 total. And then outside of the code container, still within the regular container, let's do a small tag with a class of info. And in here, I'm just going to paste in some text that basically just says, this is the design only. We don't actually take your email. We don't have your email. And that should do it for the HTML. So let's jump into our style sheet here, and I'm going to use the Moli font. So CSS question mark, and let's set the family to MULI, and then let's say colon 300 for the weight, 700. And then we're going to change that here as well. And let's just add a very light background color to the body. So for that, we're going to do hexadecimal FBFC. Let's do CFE. Okay, so not much of a difference. It's just it's a light gray, very light gray. And we can get rid of flex direction. Whoops, didn't want to do that. We can get rid of flex direction column, which I just did. And then the rest of that can stay. Container, so container wraps around everything, and for that I want to do a background color of white, and then let's do a border of 3 pixels, black and solid, and we'll give it some rounded corners. So border radius 10 pixels. Let's add some padding, get some space in there. So padding will be 30 pixels, and let's do a max width for this container of, we'll do 1000 pixels, and then let's text align everything to the center. And that should do it for the container. Now for the code container, which wraps around these right here, all these inputs, let's do that, code container. And we're going to display flex. So we're going to make this a flex box, which will make all the items, all the inputs, flex items. And I want align to the center. So we want align items and justify content to the center. And let's also just add a margin to the container, 40 pixels on the top and bottom. Okay, now we want to do each individual input, which has a class of code. So I'm going to set the border radius to 5 pixels. I'm going to make the font size much bigger, so 75 pixels, and we'll give this a fixed height of, let's say, 120 and a width of 100 pixels. And then for the border, let's do border 1 pixel, and we're going to make it really light, so we'll do solid and then triple E. Okay, so a very faint border. And then for the margin, I'm just going to do a 1% margin. So kind of break them up a little bit. Text align, obviously we want the numbers in the middle, so text align center. Let's set the font weight, make sure that that is set to 300, and then I think that's it. So that looks pretty good. We're going to get rid of these arrows here. I don't want those. The way we can do that is by taking the class of code, which is the input, and then ::- dash WebKit dash what is it, outer spin button, and then we want the inner spin button as well. So code : dash WebKit dash inner spin button, and we're going to set dash WebKit appearance to none, and let's set margin to 0. So if I do that, now you can see that those are gone. However, that's going to be Chrome and Safari. To get rid of those arrows on Firefox, we can go right into code, into the code class, and use moz dash appearance, and we can set it to text field. So that should get rid of the arrows on Firefox. Now when I click in here and we put something, I already had a 0 in there. If I put a number in here and go to the next one, I want this to have like a box shadow around it and change the border color. So we can do that by using the valid state. So if we take the input of code and say :valid, let's do a border color of 3498 dB, and then let's change, or let's add a box shadow. So box shadow will do 0, 10 pixel offset, 10 pixel blur, -5 pixel, and then RGBA, so the color, whoops, forgot the X. So the color is going to be black with 0.25 for the alpha. So now if it has the number in it, you'll see that it has this border. It also has the box shadow. Now for this down here, I'm just going to add a little bit of style to that, which has the class of info. So we'll add a background color of EA 3 times, and let's display this as an inline block because it's a small tag, so it's displayed inline by default. And I'm going to add padding to it of 10 pixels, and let's do a line height of 20 pixels, and let's do a max width of 400 pixels. So just kind of squeeze it in, and we'll change let's do color 777. So it's very light, and also border radius. Let's do border radius 5 pixels. Okay, now I do want to have this wrap, because if we make this smaller, it just kind of cuts off. So what we'll do is just let's add a media query here. So we'll say @media, and let's do a max width of 600 pixels. So when this is 600 pixels or less, let's take the code container and set flex wrap to wrap, so that way it goes on to the next line. And then I'm also going to shrink the inputs a little bit. So code, let's set the font size, which I think is 75 by default. We'll set it to 60, and the height, which I think is 100, we'll set that to 80, or it's 120, I believe. We'll set that to 80, and then let's set a max width of 70 pixels. Okay, so it'll make it a little smaller, and it will wrap. All right, so that's it for the CSS. Now the JavaScript isn't going to be too bad. What we want to do though is make it so when I click in here and I type a number and then I type another number, I don't want it to be in the same box. I want it to be in the next one, so we can quickly just type the code in. All right, so let's jump into our JavaScript and let's bring in the inputs. So we'll say const codes, because they all have the class of code, and we're going to use document.querySelector all because there's more than one that we want to grab. So the class of code, that'll put these into a node list. Now we initially want to focus on the first one, so just like an array with a node list, I can take an index, I want 0, which is the first one, and I'm going to call the focus method. So as soon as I do that, and when we come to the page, it's going to automatically put the cursor in there. Because when we come to the page, we want it to just go right into the first one, and then as we type, go across, across these inputs. So next thing we'll do is take the codes, and we can loop through with a for each. So I'm going to say for each code, and I'm also going to grab the index of each code, each input. And I want to add an event listener, so code add event listener. I want to listen for the key down event. And when that happens, we're going to run a function with an event object. And I want to just check to see if the key, so I can take this event object and say .key. So if that is greater than or equal to 0, and I also want to check to see if it's less than 9. So e.key if that's less than or equal to 9. Now if that happens, I want to then move to the next one. So if I type like 2 in here, I want this to focus on the next code, on the next input. So we can do that by taking codes, which is a node list, or basically an array, and we want to set, let's say, index. So when we loop through, we have an index that starts at 0, then the next one will be 1, 2, and so on. We just want to add 1 to that index, and we want to focus on that one. Now, if I go down here and I do that, it does move to the next one, but notice whatever I hit, which was a 3 in this case, it goes into the second one here. If I hit it again, I mean, that works, but for that first one, we want it to go in that first box. So we can just add a little set timeout here and wait, 10 milliseconds or so, and then do it. So set timeout, which takes in a function. So I'm just gonna take this and put that here. Since it's a one-liner, we don't need curly braces. And then set timeout takes a second argument of the timeout, which is gonna be for us, we'll just say 10 milliseconds. So that way, if I go down here and I put something in here, it waits and then it allows us to put the number in the first one. And then we can keep going. Now, if we hit delete, it's not doing anything now, but I want it to go back to the one before it if we mess up and we need to put a different number in. So let's do an else if, and I want to check to see if the delete button is hit or the backspace key. So let's say e.key, if it is equal to backspace, which with an uppercase B, then I want to do the same thing that I did here, except I want to do index -1 to move backwards. So now if I do like 3, 5, 6, and let's say I messed up with the 6, I can go back. However, this gets kind of messy because now if I hit delete again to try to delete that 6, it goes back to the next one, and then I end up with 2 numbers there. So it's kind of messed up right now. So this is a really easy fix. What we can do is as soon as we hit a number here, we want to basically just clear it out. So we can take, we'll say codes, and then whatever the current index is, we're going to set the value to an empty string, to just nothing. So now if I do like 2, 7, 6, and let's say that 6 was a mistake, I can hit backspace and then hit another number and it will replace it. Okay, 5, backspace, change that to a 7, 3, 4, and then whatever you would have happen after you enter the code. This is just the UI part of it. All right, so yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and we shouldn't end up with 2 numbers in any of the spaces, no matter how fast we type or anything like that. All right, so that's it. Let's go ahead and move on to the next project.